Hello and welcome to CDCT Live. I'm Jason Rader. I'm your host today, and today's topic is driving transformation with hybrid cloud. And we've got two awesome guys that are going to help us get through this conversation today. We have Peter Kratz, a portfolio director, and John O'Shaughnessy, a consulting architect, here with me at CDCT. Welcome, gentlemen. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for hosting us today, Jason.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
So let's talk hybrid cloud, shall we? So first, let's kick it off by defining hybrid cloud, because I think that's, well, certainly a good place to start. But I think that, well, I'm not going to say anything. Let's define hybrid cloud. Who wants to take that?
Throw it all on us. I think we'll probably do a little tag team here, I expect. There's a couple different ways to define it there. I mean, it's funny because we were preparing for another event. John and I were a couple days ago, and we were digging up, what is the definition everybody accepts, right? Because in our portfolio of activities, we have some common language that we've settled on. And it really narrows down to if you're using public cloud resources and your own private cloud resources, your on-prem data center in particular, you've got a hybrid cloud, right? That's the simplest way we think about it, but there's a bazillion other, micro definitions depending on what partner, might have the definition du jour. But I don't know, John, what would your take be on that?
I think that's a good take. I mean, I think the biggest issue we've got, or the big problem that we need to handle with our clients, is vocabulary setting. Is making sure that if we say hybrid cloud, we're having the same definition with the client we're talking to at that moment. Some people consider a 20-year-old data center full of racks of gear as their private cloud. And to us, it's not. It's a legacy data center. A private cloud needs to have some level of management, some level of elasticity, et cetera, cloud-like features. So the goal with a hybrid cloud would be some combination of things. Again, a little AWS perhaps, a little Azure perhaps, a little GCP perhaps, and ideally something of your own, whether it's a private data center or private cloud. And the whole trick, of course, is managing all of this.
And I think,
I'm sorry.
No, not a problem. But I think John just said something there that's key. Right? In our conversations with clients, we don't get too pedantic with the definitions because that's just annoying and doesn't really advance the conversation at all. We don't get terribly hyper specific about what constitutes a private cloud either, right? Well, we're happy to go with the sort of the common definition that people say. If I've got a data center, I've got a private cloud. That's fine enough for the conversation that we're having here, and usually for most of our customers as well. But at the margins, obviously, that doesn't really meet the definition. Like John said, most data centers don't have elasticity and so forth. We're not really worried about that. We're worried about you really in this model. You're consuming resources from multiple source providers. You're either yourself, other cloud service providers, that sort of thing. That's really where we're focused.
Awesome. Yeah, because when I think hybrid cloud, I guess you guys actually clarified something to me, because I always think of some kind of hybrid application potentially, but literally hybrid cloud, we're just talking about you use this on-prem stuff, and for something separate, you use a cloud-based service or have some workloads in the cloud.
Yeah, and some of those vendor definitions that pop up sometimes refer to the requirement in a hybrid cloud model to have some level of orchestration between the two sides, between the private cloud and the public cloud. And again, this is a thing we don't concern ourselves too terribly much with because it doesn't advance the conversation very much, doesn't help lead to more understanding, so why bother? But technically speaking, yeah, if you're in a hybrid cloud, you should have orchestration between them. If you're looking for the dictionary definition, but it's no point in getting too pedantic with these things because ultimately what you're trying to do is highlight challenges and what's the roadmap look like and why are you using a hybrid model instead of all private or all public or no cloud at all, that sort of thing.
Got it. So, well, now that we've got at least a baseline, and why hybrid cloud? So what's the benefit here? What's the enticement?
I think the enticement comes in when you say, what is it that an organization is looking to do? 4 or 5 years ago, public cloud was the hot new thing. And everyone said, hey, we're going to move everything to the public cloud because you know what? I can throw a credit card down on the table, $50 a VM, I'm good to go. Sometimes you have to walk that back a little bit and say, well, what exactly are you doing for your business? What is your computing infrastructure running today? Now let's slice and dice that and figure out what makes sense. Many things do make sense or can make sense in public cloud, but there are certain workloads that based on their utilization are not a good fit. And so let's talk about where those need to go, private cloud or legacy data center. But then as an IT organization, how do you manage all of it? How do you understand the costs for all of it and make it make sense back to your business?
Yeah, I think John, kind of hinted at something there. What's the draw? What's the compelling feature? And it's really the platform capabilities that the public cloud service providers can introduce that that an evolving, maturing IT shop wants to be able to take advantage of right now, but developing those capabilities in-house, may take longer than let's say developers internally can wait for, right? So they want to grab those capabilities now, but they also don't want to lose some of the flavor, I think, in a lot of cases of the way they run their on-prem estates, whether it's private cloud or a data center or colo or whatever. So it's just the ability to take advantage of those capabilities immediately. And then evolve the rest of their IT shop over time. I think that's, for me, that seems to be a leading draw for our clients anyway.
Yeah, I mean, AI comes to mind when you're talking about that, right?
Oh yeah. Who's got the time to go build that from scratch? Right now, right? Try before you buy, or decide how far down the rabbit hole you want to go with that, whether it's a platform service, a microservice, or whatever. And then over time, decide how heavily your business relies upon that service to make a judgment call as to whether you bring that in-house or just continue to to double down on public cloud.
And John brought up an interesting topic that I've heard for a long time, is that whole, $50 a VM, I'll throw my credit card down. That's the easy way to go, right? And I think when people think that way, they've probably had an issue with getting a server set up to serve them within, they've got an application that they're building or something along those lines. And that $50 a VM, they're just thinking obviously a little short-sighted at what that's ultimately going to cost from a total cost of ownership perspective. But that ease of, kind of back to your point, Pete, is being able to have access to the resources or the technologies that they need to be able to do something. And then I think, John, you also brought up something that I think is worth talking about as well, is that, public cloud, well, that's where we're going to go. We're going everywhere to public cloud. Why, so in that hybrid, it sounds like every cloud's a hybrid cloud. Sounds like a song. But
is Guns N' Roses back on tour?
But why, what have people found when they thought that whole public cloud, it's all going to be public cloud? Why do we feel like pretty much every cloud is going to be a hybrid cloud moving forward?
John, that's our premise, right? I mean, I
absolutely
feel like I just cut you off there, but isn't that our premise, that no matter what your plan was in the beginning, it ultimately 99% of our engagements end up with a hybrid cloud solution.
So why did they think hybrid cloud was going to, or not hybrid cloud? Why did they think public cloud was going to be the way that they needed to go, before we get back to why it's not?
Public cloud providers were really strong with their message, which is they looked at the problems of legacy IT and said, it's slow to deliver, it's expensive, and there's a lot of waste, a lot of over-provisioned services. And they created a service to respond to those very real needs. And so when IT leaders would read that message and see some examples, they're like, absolutely, 100%, I'm going to go do this. And again, great idea. But if you have an existing IT environment that you need to analyze, it may not all fit into that model. And that's where we come in, is we really like to help clients dig into their environment, understand their workloads, to help find that appropriate place. And when we've helped clients do that, that's where we determine we have to do some slicing and dicing. Some things great fit for public cloud, Some things may be a good fit for public cloud, but need some work to get there. And other things, you know what? They're going to stay on-prem, whether it's technical reasons, business driver reasons, or maybe it's an application that's going to be expired in 6 months. No sense in investing in moving that.
Got it. So what are some of the caveats that I think that you guys have experienced that people found that after they kind of bought into that whole, oh, well, it's going to be easy. I think, when I think of infrastructure as a service, I think that's the misnomer. If that's what I'm going to leverage the public cloud for, and that's it, I'm probably not doing the right thing. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, well, to a point.
Maybe.
Right?
Okay.
Yeah, I love that. I love that hedging, right?
We're consultants. It depends.
Yeah. Yeah. We can give no straight answers. We get paid by the word, remember. So we have to draw it out as long as we can. But yeah, there's a bunch of different, vectors from which some of these pain points come that ultimately lead our customers down a different path. One of my favorites, and I'm kind of staring at it right now, is this has come up in a number of different cases where I don't know how they missed this piece, but this shift, for example, from CapEx to OpEx. You're buying your own hardware; it's being depreciated on a capital expense, basis and so forth. And then when you move to public cloud, that expense tends to be treated as operational expense, which is completely different tax thing for our C-levels. And so that one hits them in the face a bunch, surprisingly often, actually, because you would think it would be one of those first order things everybody would know. It's more funny to me than anything else that somebody didn't know that. Those aren't I wouldn't say it isn't one of the prime 9 or 10 reasons why customers change direction. We could articulate probably 20, but in the top 10 pantheon, my favorite is maybe two. Maybe I have two favorites here. One is that moving from what you're doing now to some future state, public cloud. Right? It's a big project. I don't care how big your organization is. It's a big project, and for some reason we're still fighting the perception that we just do this weekend, right? We just migrate this, and not realizing that, okay, wait a minute, there's changes in skill sets you need to acquire that you don't have, or the way some applications may function is gonna change. Especially if they have a really large appetite and they're very, very aggressive and want to, re-platform their applications and break them apart and make them cloud native, that sort of thing. So the understanding the scope and scale of the project ahead of them tends to be one blocker or one reason they go in a different direction. And the other, for me, that's kind of a favorite is, particularly in very, very large environments, the lack of real up to date, up to the minute knowledge of what the inventory looks like and what's capable of going left, right, and center. That doesn't so much surprise me because we see it everywhere. But I'd see those two. How big is that project, and what do you really know about the environment that during your planning process you're going to discover that's going to go, oh yeah, we can't complete this in 3 months. It's going to take us 3 years. But I don't know, John, what about you? Do you have other favorites on the top 10 list than me?
Again, I think it gets right back to that discovery question. And a lot of times it's helping clients, walk back their excitement to go in a single direction. And that's what drives it back to being a mix of things. And so again, I think it's helping people understand what is the right environment for their different activities, different applications. And again, we've got all sorts of wonderful stories. We've had clients who had a technical decision to move to public cloud, move things out there. It functioned technically fine, but 3 months later they come back and go, whoa, we just burned through 12 months budget in 3 months. I guess we didn't understand all the cost vectors, whether it was ongoing storage, even though they were able to shut down their servers at night, or data egress charges to pull data back on-prem. These weren't things that they had considered. Therefore, maybe the workload, at least as currently architected, wasn't the right thing to move to public cloud.
Oh, or John, just to kind of tee off what you just said there, because I think I know some of these examples that you're referencing without naming names, because mum's the word, right? But not even so much that we've burned through 3 months of in 3 months we burned through a year's worth of budget, but why? Well, because you had junk governance before then, and you brought that junk governance with you to the public cloud. And now, where it used to take 6 months to get a new server, and that can, that sort of muted and dulled the sharp point of the costs that you incur for acquiring those assets and rolling out new applications. Now they can just do it in 10 minutes because your governance was just junk before, right? So now that customer might not have spent all that money in 3 months had they had some controls over and goes, who's provisioning these machines or these services, and who's spinning up all these apps and not decommissioning them when they're out of the smoke test or whatever. So yeah, that there's a lot of different ways. And the reason I brought it up that in that context, right, about cost, was not to say that, to make the point that it's not that the public cloud folks are not transparent with what their costs are. They're quite transparent. They've got cost sheets. You can look them up and everything else. It's controlling how people are spending that money is, I think, a harder challenge for, especially if you don't have governance and controls over who's allowed to access a subscription and provision resources. Sorry, John, you kind of said something that kind of made me a little excited. Like, yes, please.
No, I mean, I think that's something that we can go off for a while, is that you can't get rid of your problems just by moving to a new environment. A lot of the things that make public cloud very effective is that it can make it easy to enforce the kinds of processes that you need to be agile, to move quickly, to be able to say, you know what, I'm not going to create every server, whether virtual or physical, as a custom thing. We're going to create t-shirt sizes, a small, a medium, and large. And you know what? Some things may be a little over provisions. Other things, if they are under provisioned, we'll fix it because we have the data to see it. But by having standards in place, and then you know what? You can tie in your security standards saying this type of server going into a public-facing DMZ has these exact firewall rules, et cetera, pre-canned. So you don't need to add 3 weeks for security to review and 3 more weeks for purchasing to get a new network card or whatever. It's baked in, but it's less about the technology. It's more about the processes. And again, back to why is it hybrid? It takes a while to create those processes, to update those processes, to train people on those processes. And sometimes even if an application or workload is a good candidate for public cloud, the timing just isn't right. So you know what? We're going to leave this in its existing state for another year until the people and processes can come up to speed and have us be ready to move forward.
And something John just said that kind of reminded me of value management that tends to not be as much a part of the conversation. And I don't mean that too hardcore dictionary definition, but what I'm really getting at is expectations management. As we work with clients, and we look at, they bring us in a lot of times because they're somewhere along their journey towards moving towards public cloud, as an example, and they want us to help them with step X, whatever that is, right? Step 3, to move some stuff or re-architect some things, and then when we start digging into it a little bit to find out, okay, why are you doing this and what's going on? We want to make sure we give you good recommendations as we go through the process. We find that there's lots of mislaid expectations. Maybe we didn't sit down in the development of the strategy and define what is it we're trying to get out of this, and is it reasonable to expect that we'll achieve those benefits, and how do we measure that we've gotten there? Tends to be missing from in a lot of cases when we have to go backwards with customers. And I feel like, there's a bit of a hype cycle thing that's still going on here. Yeah, and this isn't like the CSPs are not overstating their case. They're amazing. They do some incredible work, and the services are fantastic. But I don't know that there's a real hard, firm definition of what it is we're trying to get out of this exercise. And so we're going to go all cloud. Then becomes, well, okay, why? Why are you doing that? We've actually had customers. It's fun. One of my favorite customer stories, and this is your story, John, is actually one of the financial services companies that really they came into it, I think, in the best way, with the most amazing open mind. We think we want to do public cloud. And if we're going to do public cloud, we're going to go all in, and we're going to make it not just hybrid cloud, but we're going to make it multi-cloud. And we're not even going to be on-prem. We're going to go there. let's see if that's feasible for what we do. And I like their story because they came at it with an open mind, but ultimately their business doesn't need any of that. I mean, they could run the darn thing on paper if they needed to, but it's just, again, I'm sorry, I feel bad because now I'm taking your story away from you here.
Go ahead and tell the story, John.
So again, it's somebody who I, take the example of, they came up with a great idea because the public clouds are so good at their messaging is, hey, we're going all in. But the nice thing was that they did stop and say, let's look at this. Let's see what it takes to get there. And they engaged us. And I think initially they thought it was, okay, you're going to help us do some inventory of our environment, maybe double check a few things, and then create a roadmap. And then let's talk migration. Go, go, go. But what happened throughout this engagement is we bring in all the right people from the client, all the stakeholders. We began to realize that it wasn't going to be a great fit for everything, certainly not right away. So at the end of our engagement, it was, okay, here's what we're going to do to move forward on the public pathway. But here's all the other stuff that we recommend you do at least for the next 3 years. And you know what? The bulk of it is on premise. And here's why. And we had the numbers, and we walked through a nice detailed total cost of ownership model to help the financial parts of the organization, see from their point of view what went into our decision making and why we thought certain things made sense.
Nice. I think, and this
Hey,
is kind of
Jason, there's a question in chat here that I think would be worth addressing here, which is, to what extent are we seeing businesses, regulatory, and our security controls playing into business hesitancy moving to the cloud from the perspective of Director of Information Security?
So who should answer that?
Yeah, yeah, I feel like it's a three-way answer, honestly. I'll start maybe, and Jason, you might even have some really good background here because you're having some of the same conversations in your role, for sure. Completely, I think, if not entirely, right? To what extent it comes up literally every conversation, in every project, in every conversation we have, it always comes up. The degree of severity or density to which that's a concern for our customers varies depending on industry. For me, again, I'm going from my experience with talking with clients, which, I'll be interested in hear your other perspectives. But so it comes up every time. It depends on industry, how really hardcore they have to be about it and how much they're concerned, how big are their concerns. But ultimately, there are established good practices, best practices, policies, process controls, and governance that we can help them along the way. And I don't think there's any fundamental risk there that they don't already have in their own data centers, but maybe experience.
Let me jump in and then we'll let Jason finish up. One of the things I find interesting is a few years back when we'd go out and query the businesses about, hey, we're thinking of moving some of your stuff to public cloud, we would get a lot of pushback for non-technical reasons. We had organizations saying, well, we've got HIPAA data. We're not sure about the providers. Can they take care of that? Or we consider this the crown jewels of the company. It's intellectual property we want to protect. We're not comfortable. And as we go through these workload alignment processes with clients, we would create this scoring system. And if they said these things were, right out the door, well, fine. That's a tick in the answer column that says it's going to stay on-prem. I think where we get to today is some of the technical concerns, like can a top tier public provider become appropriately certified, to play along with, again, they're not wholly responsible, but to play along with, say, HIPAA compliance. Absolutely they can. So the concerns have shifted a bit, but not entirely. So that's kind of what I'm seeing on that side. And Jason, we'll let you finish that one up.
No, I appreciate both of those angles. I think, one of the things that we kind of talked about, and it's kind of the thread of the whole hybrid cloud aspect, whether it's right or whether it's wrong, is somebody understanding what their environment is before they try to go somewhere else, right? And I think that's, from a security perspective, I think one of the hesitancies early on was, we don't if I'm like, what kind of data is in that? They're like, oh, I don't know. Where does it touch? Where's it stored? Understanding their classifications of data and having that sorted out, which is one of those things that we all kind of know how to do, but there's not a great amount around that data classification. And at least back when everything was within our perimeter, and we were just kind of like, let's just manage this inside. Once we start moving it outside, especially with GDPR and CCPA and all of these other things that are going on, it's making people take a little bit of pause and before they go out and do something. I think that now, for sure, there was a time, and let's go way back, a decade ago, when PCI, you couldn't certify the payment card industry if you operated in a virtual environment, period. So if you used virtualized servers, that you could not get certified from a PCI perspective, which obviously we know that's changed since then. But the problem is nobody had ever done it. I was on the special interest group for that because it was an important thing that we had to, hey, guys, this is the way that it's going to work moving forward. We've got to figure out a way to certify that. And eventually, obviously, it came about. I think there are some things, and I can't remember which one of you guys said it, but there are some things where we're maybe pushing the envelope a little bit. But the public cloud providers understand it's in their best interest to understand the compliance aspects of, obviously, they have specific carved out government sections of their environment so that we can meet certain requirements along those lines. The auditing requirements are all there. I like a challenge. So somebody tell me a specific requirement that they don't think can be met, and I will say with this control or that control on how we can figure out how to make it work. The other thing is you've got to figure out the cost to benefit, right? So why are we trying to put this somewhere where we think there's maybe a risk? What's the benefit of doing it versus keeping it local and controlling it in that form or fashion? And that goes back to every cloud's going to be hybrid, because there's going to be those special circumstances where maybe it's not from a practical aspect of like, can we do it? It's a should we do it? And the corporate governance says, we don't take this data outside of these four walls. And if that's the case, great. I'm not going to argue with that. Here's how we're going to use it staying here. And if it needs to integrate or operate with some other stuff, here's how we can make that happen.
Yeah, and just to kind of tee off what you were saying there, and as I'm reading the question a little more, there's two aspects to it, right? There's the perspective of whoever asked the question. Obviously they're the director of information security, probably a CISO, right? But the question was the business hesitancy moving to the cloud. How often does that come up? And I chuckle a little bit because the business doesn't know. I mean, come on. Because the business is the one that wants us to go to the cloud, right? So they I think every CISO will tell you that they don't think enough about security in the business as a general rule. But from a technical perspective, very, very rarely do we see objections from a technical front, unless it's some obscure thing. The pushing the envelope stuff you were talking about a minute ago, Jason. This is, some of these technical bits maybe come up, but for the most part, these problems are generally solved. If where we see weaknesses, not that this question was asked, but where we see weaknesses in InfoSec, it comes almost exclusively from governance. But I'm not a bad guy to answer that part of the question. If it were asked, that would be more on your end, Jason. But honestly, people leaving containers wide open to the general public and that sort of thing. There's nothing the public cloud providers can do to stop you from making bad technical moves, terrible configurations, because maybe you want all your data accessible to everybody on the internet. Who knows? But yeah, it comes up all the time, and really, we tend to get past it. I mean, it's a concern, but not one that not a hurdle.
Depends, on the provider itself, like whether or not you can control your own encryption keys and those types of things. Every now and then, there's a nuance to how the public cloud providers want to do it, and I think they're all, once there was an objection to that where I need to control my own encryption keys, I think everybody kind of fell in line with those things. Again, the cloud providers want to make it easy for you to use their service, and a lot of that, remember, from what we were just talking about, they try to make it super easy. Put down the credit card, $50 a month, rock and roll. Let's do this. Oh, and they're going to manage my encryption for me? Cool. But, then from a business perspective, it's how we, what the appetite of risk is for the organization. And a lot of this, again, is back down to that governance perspective, not just security governance, but governance in general. What are the things we have to consider when we do something like this? And I think a lot of that is kind of know thyself. You've got to know the impact. I think back to the whole security aspect, and I don't want to drain this, but when you move something out of your data center and put it into public cloud, you might not have thought anything about the additional security controls that were protecting that data center. So you're thinking, oh, I'm fine. There's nothing that this touches. And then moving it out there without consulting the rest of the organization potentially gets you into some trouble. And I did see somebody say that if the 3-letter government agencies can use public cloud, obviously it is somebody that folks can use from the private sector as well. Absolutely. So I think every 3-letter agency, it has in some form or fashion is using public cloud for something.
Well, and that example is another one where we help our clients and they'll say, look, we've got certain things that require us to be in, GovCloud. Okay. But they said, generally speaking, GovCloud is not the right thing for all of our workloads. So then what should we put into, say, the commercial side versus GovCloud versus staying on-prem? And then it gets right back to, hey, every cloud is a hybrid cloud.
Well, and not just that, but I think GovCloud is also this misnomer. I mean, not picking on specifically Amazon, but GovCloud, a lot of folks would think, oh, I'm going to GovCloud, more secure, security's covered, right? And that is not the case whatsoever. You still have to deal with your access control, your users, all of that stuff. You still have to practice good security and have good governance over the things that you manage from that cloud aspect. Just because the cloud provider is managing it from a certain layer up, you still own a certain amount of that responsibility. So that's something that people have forgotten in the past.
Good comments, by the way.
Yeah, thank you.
It's nice to see folks.
Actually, this is the most comments we've gotten during a session. So thank you guys out there. So guys, since we've kind of talked about a lot of caveats, we made the definitive statement that every cloud's going to be a hybrid cloud moving forward, which I agree with. What are the tips? Are there some frameworks? Are there some tips that we should be throwing out for folks that are thinking about the journey or have embarked upon the journey and now need to think additionally about the journey?
Well, I like to have folks understand that they need to really have a handle on their current environment. What are all of their workloads? How are they used? What are the business units that use these workloads? Take a look at your staff. What are the skill sets you've got? Do you have bandwidth to learn a new system administration, network administration, and security administration platform? Or how many of them, if you're truly looking at multiple clouds? Do you have the bandwidth for that? Think about realistically what the timing is to do these things. Look at the life cycle of your existing applications. Are some of them going to be retired soon? Are you already looking at replacements? Frankly, one of the easiest things to do to take best advantage of public cloud is to have those apps that are born in the cloud, natively developed to take advantage of not necessarily spinning up a virtual machine as infrastructure, but take advantage of the serverless features. But again, that's not going to be a 1-week cutover from this thing I have running on premise to a public cloud. And to really, think about all of that before you just leap into a massive migration.
Yeah, I'd agree.
I'll add one thing before I turn it over to you, Pete.
Sure. Oh, that's funny.
Jason, you locked up.
I think that's hilarious because the irony of the timing of the whole thing. But while Jason's getting his connection back here, I think I'd echo everything that you said, John. I think, there's an interesting comment in the chat that's around the cost of ownership and understanding what the what the true cost of ownership is. But I think, and that goes back to for me, that expectations management and the value management chain in the development of the strategy that's going to drive us to public cloud in some way, shape, or form, partial or total, is it may not necessarily be cheaper, and often is not to go to public cloud, particularly for everything, and especially if you're just moving everything as infrastructure as a service. I mean, that's silly. But John, you make a great point, right? Let's get these cloud native apps developed. Let's use platform services and microservices, and to their best and fullest extent, because those are far more cost effective, number one. But while the cost ultimately might be higher in some cases, again, depending on the model you're using, you're also getting access to some feature benefits and capabilities that just don't exist otherwise, that are, or tasks that are a lot simpler to perform. Availability is a lot less challenging to maintain, I think, in some cases. So look for, again, back to the whole, what are you looking to get out of this? One of my favorite old stories, this was not quite 10 years ago, probably 8, something like that. When I had a meeting with a client whose CIO was bound and determined to use public cloud as their disaster recovery target. They're going to still maintain an on-prem data center for their primary workload assets, but the public cloud was their DR target. And because of the way that the CIO was approaching this, everything was a tier 1 application, and everything was going to be replicated in the cloud. And in the event of a giant disaster, the big one, this was a customer up in Los Angeles, we're going to run this entire shop in the cloud, and everything's going to be great, and we're going to be able to conduct all of our business. And he hadn't done the first step in determining whether that was a good idea or not, and that would be reading the FEMA reports for this particular zone, which would have told him it's all kind of unnecessary to do it that way, because nobody's going to be coming into work, and nobody's going to have power to consume your services that you're selling and running this business and so forth. So again, back to it's good planning, the upfront discovery stuff we talked about earlier, and understanding what you have. I think it's helpful too, before you embark on a journey like this, to do some housekeeping and cleaning, clean out the closets a little bit, conduct application rationalization, and go through the application estate and retire as many applications as you can, as quickly as you can, ahead of this, right? Get rid of the garbage before you start moving everything, or having to deal with those assets in some meaningful way that gets in the way of your other activities you're trying to execute with your cloud migration or transformation. Really understand how the cost model plays into your business's financial structure, and how they handle taxes and so forth, because the CapEx OpEx thing still keeps coming up, and it's just a shock to me that isn't a first order question that gets asked. John, I think we've covered it pretty well, honestly.
I think we have. I don't know if Jason's going to be able to rejoin us. I don't think he's in Texas, but you don't know what he's hassling with. Oh, hey! Speak of the devil.
All right. Hey, you came back just at the right time. Perfect.
I was stuck backstage. I was watching. You guys are doing a great job.
Oh. Well, Jason, where do we go from here?
Well, you know what? Thanks, gentlemen, for the conversation. I think that it was lively, and it was good, and there were some surprises. I appreciate the whole aspect. And again, every cloud will be a hybrid one. I love the aspect that we've covered, and I think we've got lots of additional resources related to this on insightcdct.com. Thank you, Pete. Thank you, John. We had a good session today, and thank you guys out there for your comments, and thanks for listening. Cheers.
Thanks much.
Thank you.